A woman arrived at a frozen mountain cabin as payment for a debt she didn't owe. The man who married her had carved another woman's name above the door. Between them stood a brutal winter, a ruthless businessman who'd tracked her through 3 states, and a question neither could answer. Was their marriage real enough to survive what was coming? This is their story. Stay until the end, hit that like button, and drop a comment telling me what city you're watching from. I want to see how far this tale travels across the world. The wind off Holt Ridge didn't howl like most mountain storms. It whispered, long thin sounds that crawled under door frames and through gaps in timber walls, carrying threats instead of noise. Caleb Mercer had lived with that whisper for 11 years, and it had never once lied to him. Today it was saying, something's coming that'll change everything. He stood in the crooked doorway of Black Hollow's only church, a structure that leaned slightly westward as if trying to escape the town it served. His hands were clean for once, scrubbed raw that morning until the timber stains finally lifted from beneath his fingernails. The suit he wore was older than his cabin, borrowed from a dead man's trunk because he didn't own anything worth wearing to a wedding, even his own. Preacher Yates hovered near the altar, pale and fidgeting, like a man who'd bet on the wrong horse and couldn't back out now. The church smelled like damp wood and old candle wax. 3 witnesses sat scattered across the pews, the blacksmith's wife, a trapper missing 2 fingers, and a boy too young to understand what he was watching. Caleb didn't want witnesses, didn't want the suit, didn't want any of this ceremony wrapped around what should have been simple as a timber contract. But the girl arriving from the east probably expected something, so here he stood. The door cracked open behind him. Preacher Yates straightened. The blacksmith's wife leaned forward. Even the boy stopped swinging his legs. And Caleb turned around. The woman stepping through the doorway wasn't what he'd imagined during the long weeks of waiting. The advertisement he'd answered described her as young, suitable for frontier life, seeking respectable arrangement. He'd pictured someone worn down already, desperate enough to marry a stranger and climb a mountain without asking too many questions. But Evelyn Cross didn't look desperate. She looked dangerous. Not in the way of weapons or violence. Dangerous the way a creek looks calm right before the current takes you under. She was younger than he'd expected, mid-20s maybe, with dark hair pinned back severe and tight, like she didn't trust it loose. Her dress was plain, gray wool that had seen better years, and she carried one battered leather suitcase that couldn't have held more than 2 changes of clothes. But her eyes were what stopped him cold. Green, sharp, and absolutely terrified. Not of him, though. That was the strange part. She looked at Caleb like he was a means to an end, a door she was trying to get through before something behind her caught up. Her gaze moved past him, scanning the church, the witnesses, the preacher, like she was measuring exits. "Miss Cross," Preacher Yates said, too loud, his voice cracking on her name. "Welcome to Black Hollow. We're so pleased you've arrived safely." She didn't answer, just set the suitcase down with a soft thud and finally looked directly at Caleb. For 3 long seconds, neither of them spoke. Then she said, "You're Caleb Mercer." It wasn't a question. Her voice was lower than he'd expected, steadier, educated, like she'd come from money once, before whatever happened to bring her here. "That's right. And you understand the terms of this arrangement?" "I do. No expectations beyond what was written in the agreement. Separate lives under the same roof. Mutual benefit, nothing more." Caleb felt the blacksmith's wife shift uncomfortably behind him. Even the preacher looked away, but he kept his eyes on Evelyn and nodded once. "That's what I signed on for." Something flickered across her face. Relief, maybe, or disappointment. He couldn't tell. "Then let's proceed," she said quietly, "before the weather turns." Preacher Yates practically scrambled to the altar. The ceremony that followed was the shortest Caleb had ever witnessed. No music, no flowers. No promises about love or cherishing, just the legal binding words required to make the arrangement legitimate in the eyes of the law and the thin document they both signed with hands that didn't shake. When the preacher pronounced them married, Evelyn didn't look at Caleb. She looked at the door like she was already calculating how far up the mountain they could get before dark. They were outside and loading the suitcase onto his horse before the blacksmith's wife cornered them. "Mrs. Mercer," she said, her voice dripping with something that pretended to be concern. "You understand where you're going, don't you? Holt Ridge isn't like town. It's isolated, dangerous. The winters there have killed stronger women than you." Evelyn's expression didn't change. "Thank you for your concern," I'm just saying there's still time to reconsider. A woman alone up there. She won't be alone, Caleb cut in, his voice flat. She'll be with me. The blacksmith's wife's mouth tightened into a thin line. That's what worries us, Caleb Mercer. Last woman who went up that ridge with you didn't exactly... That's enough. The words came out harder than he'd intended. The blacksmith's wife stepped back, her face flushing red, and after a moment of tense silence, she turned and walked away. But not before throwing Evelyn one last pitying look that said everything the words didn't. Evelyn watched her go, then glanced at Caleb. Should I be worried? About her? No. About what she was talking about. Caleb tightened the straps on the suitcase. You're worried about plenty of things already. Don't waste energy on old gossip. Is it gossip if it's true? He met her eyes. We should go. Storm's coming in fast. She studied him for a moment longer, then nodded and let him help her onto the horse. Her hands were trembling despite the calm in her voice. He pretended not to notice. The ride out of Black Hollow was silent, except for the wind. The town sat in a valley between two ridges, a collection of crooked buildings that seemed to be slowly sinking into the mud. Once, it had been a waypoint for trappers and traders heading deeper into the territory. Now it was just a handful of stubborn people refusing to admit the frontier had moved on without them. As they climbed the narrow trail leading up toward Holt Ridge, Caleb glanced back once and saw a few of the townsfolk standing in the street, watching them disappear into the tree line. He wondered how many were placing bets on whether Evelyn would make it through the winter. The trail grew steeper. The trees pressed in close, pine and aspen crowding the path until the sky was just a narrow strip of gray above them. The temperature dropped with every 100 feet they climbed, and Caleb could feel the shift in the air, the pressure change that meant snow was close. Behind him, Evelyn sat rigid and silent. She hadn't spoken since they'd left the church, and he wasn't sure if that was fear or determination keeping her quiet. Finally, after nearly an hour, she broke the silence. How much farther? Another 2 hours if the weather holds. 4 if it doesn't. A pause. Then, will anyone come looking for me up there? Caleb's hands tightened on the reins. That wasn't the question he'd expected. Not how cold does it get, or is there a town nearby, or any of the practical things a new bride should be asking. This was something else, something that made his instincts, honed by years alone on the mountain, start whispering warnings. Looking for you, why? Just answer the question. He considered lying, considered telling her that people passed through the ridge all the time, that it was easy to find. But something in her voice told him she'd know. No, he said finally. Ridge is isolated. Trail's hard to follow if you don't know it. Most folks in Black Hollow don't even remember it exists unless they need timber. You want to disappear up there, you can. He felt her relax slightly behind him. Just a fraction, but enough to notice. Good, she whispered. The snow started 20 minutes later. At first it was just a few flakes drifting down through the pine branches, lazy and harmless. But Caleb had spent enough winters on Holt Ridge to know how fast that could change. He urged the horse faster, navigating the switchbacks with practiced ease while Evelyn held on behind him. By the time they reached the ridgeline, the snow was falling thick and fast, cutting visibility down to 20 feet. The wind had picked up too, that whispering sound turning into something sharper, meaner. We're close, Caleb called back over his shoulder. Just another mile. Evelyn didn't answer. When he glanced back, he saw she'd pulled her thin coat tighter and lowered her head against the wind. She looked small, fragile, completely out of place in this frozen wilderness. She won't last a month, he thought. First real storm will break her. But then he remembered the way she'd looked at the church door, the way she'd asked about being found. Maybe fragile wasn't the right word. The cabin appeared through the snow like a dark shape emerging from fog. It sat in a small clearing on the eastern edge of the ridge, backed up against a stand of old-growth pine that provided shelter from the worst of the western winds. The structure itself was simple: single room, stone chimney, timber walls Caleb had cut and notched himself over the course of 2 brutal summers. A small porch ran along the front, and there was a lean-to shelter for the horse around the side. It wasn't much, but it had kept him alive for 11 years. Caleb dismounted and helped Evelyn down. Her legs nearly buckled when her feet hit the ground, numb from the cold and the long ride. He steadied her with one hand while reaching for her suitcase with the other. That's when she saw it. The initials carved above the cabin door. They were old, the edges softened by years of weather, but still clearly visible even through the falling snow. CM plus RH. Evelyn stared at them for a long moment, her face unreadable. Then she turned to Caleb and asked the question he'd been dreading since the moment she'd stepped into that church. Am I your wife? Or just the replacement for the woman who left? The wind howled, snow gathered in her hair, and Caleb realized he didn't have a good answer. Come inside, he said finally, before you freeze. But she didn't move. I asked you a question, and I said come inside. Caleb. Her name was Rebecca, he said, the words coming out harsh and clipped. She was my wife. She left 3 years ago because she couldn't handle the isolation, took everything she could carry, and walked down this mountain in the middle of winter. I haven't seen her since. That answer your question? Evelyn's expression didn't change. Not really. Then what do you want to know? Whether I'm here because you want a partner, or because you just need someone to fill the empty space she left behind? The question hit harder than he'd expected. Caleb looked at her standing there in the snow, shivering and exhausted, but refusing to back down, and felt something crack open in his chest that he'd thought he'd sealed shut years ago. I don't know, he said honestly. But right now we both need to get inside before the storm gets worse, so we can figure out the rest later. After a long moment, Evelyn nodded and let him lead her into the cabin. The interior was exactly what she'd expected, and somehow worse. One room. A stone fireplace taking up most of the far wall, a narrow bed in one corner, a table with 2 mismatched chairs, shelves holding supplies and basic cooking equipment. Everything was functional, utilitarian, stripped of anything that might be considered comfort or decoration, except for 3 things. A quilt folded at the foot of the bed, worn but carefully maintained, with a pattern of stars that clearly took months to stitch. A bundle of dried wildflowers hanging from a beam near the window, and a chipped blue cup sitting on the shelf beside the stove, positioned like it was waiting for someone to use it. Evelyn recognized them immediately for what they were. Ghosts. The woman who'd lived here before had left pieces of herself behind, and Caleb had kept every one. You can have the bed, Caleb said, setting her suitcase down near the fireplace. I'll sleep on the floor tonight. Tomorrow we can figure out a more permanent arrangement. Where do you normally sleep? The bed? Then that's where you'll sleep tonight. I'm not taking your bed on the first night. You just rode for 6 hours in a snowstorm. Take the bed. I just married a stranger and climbed a mountain. I think I can handle sleeping on the floor. Caleb turned to look at her, something close to surprise crossing his face. Then the corner of his mouth twitched, not quite a smile, but close. You're stubborn. You say that like it's a bad thing. On this ridge, it might keep you alive. He moved to the fireplace and started building a fire with quick, practiced movements. Within minutes, flames were crackling and heat was beginning to push back the cold. Evelyn stood near the door, still wearing her coat, not quite ready to commit to being here. You can take the coat off, Caleb said without looking at her. I'm not going to hurt you. I didn't think you were. Then why are you still standing by the door like you're planning to run? Because I am, she thought. Because I've been running for 3 months, and I don't know how to stop. But what she said was, I need to ask you something. Caleb straightened, brushing soot off his hands. Go ahead. The arrangement we agreed to, separate lives, no expectations. Does that still stand? That's what we agreed to. I need to hear you say it clearly, no misunderstandings later. He studied her for a long moment, and she saw something shift in his expression. A recognition, maybe, that whatever she was running from was serious enough to demand absolute clarity. You want your own space, you get your own space, he said slowly. You want to be left alone, I leave you alone. This is a practical arrangement. I need help managing the ridge through winter, and you need somewhere safe to stay. That's the deal. Nothing more unless you decide otherwise. And if I never decide otherwise? Then we live like neighbors under the same roof. Evelyn felt some of the tension leave her shoulders. Okay, but I need the same promise from you. She blinked. What do you mean? You're running from something. I can see it, and I'm not asking what it is because it's not my business. But if whatever you're running from shows up on this ridge, I need to know about it before it becomes a problem for both of us. Can you promise me that? Her throat went tight. She thought about Victor Hale. About the debt papers with her father's shaking signature at the bottom. About the way Hale had smiled when he'd told her she had two choices: marry him or watch her father go to prison. Yes, she lied. I promise. Caleb held her gaze for another moment, then nodded and turned back to the fire. There's stew in the pot from yesterday. It's cold, but it's food. You should eat something. Evelyn finally took off her coat and moved toward the table. Her whole body ached from the ride, and exhaustion was starting to creep in around the edges of her mind. But she forced herself to eat, to drink water from the chipped blue cup that felt wrong in her hands, to stay alert even as Caleb moved around the cabin in silence. Tell me about the ridge, she said after a while. What should I know? Caleb was checking the door latch, making sure it would hold against the wind. Storm passes tonight. Tomorrow I'll show you the layout. Where the wood's stored, the well, the boundaries you don't cross. Trail down to town takes 4 hours in good weather, 8 in bad. Supply run every 2 weeks during winter, more often when the pass is clear. Do you see other people often? No. Do you want to? He turned to look at her. I wouldn't have chosen this ridge if I wanted company. Then why did you agree to marry me? The question hung in the air between them. Outside, the wind picked up, rattling the shutters. The fire crackled and popped. Practical reasons, Caleb said finally. Ridge is too much for one person to manage alone. I needed help. You could have hired someone. Tried that. They never stay. So you thought a wife would be more committed than hired help? I thought a legal contract might last longer than good intentions. Evelyn absorbed that, turning it over in her mind. It made sense in a cold, logical way. But it also felt incomplete, like there was something else he wasn't saying. Your turn, Caleb said, settling into the chair across from her. Why did you answer the advertisement? She'd prepared for this question, had rehearsed the answer during the long journey west. But sitting here in the firelight, looking at this stranger who was now legally her husband, the practiced words felt hollow. I needed to leave Boston, she said carefully. Quickly. This seemed like the best option. Running from what? You said it wasn't your business. I also said if it's going to become a problem for both of us, I need to know. It won't. You sure about that? No, she wasn't sure about anything, but admitting that felt like giving up the last piece of control she had left. I'm sure, she said. Caleb didn't look convinced, but he let it drop. He stood and moved to the shelves, pulling down a second blanket and tossing it to her. You're taking the bed, he said, his tone leaving no room for argument this time. I've slept on this floor 1,000 times. One more night won't kill me. Get some rest. Tomorrow starts early. Evelyn wanted to argue, wanted to maintain the boundary she'd set. But exhaustion was winning, and the bed, despite the ghost of another woman woven into its quilt, looked impossibly inviting. Thank you, she said quietly. Caleb just nodded and settled himself on the floor near the fire, using his coat as a pillow. Within minutes, his breathing had evened out into the rhythm of sleep. But Evelyn lay awake for hours, staring at the ceiling beams and listening to the storm rage outside. She thought about the initials carved above the door, about the woman who'd slept in this bed before her, about whether she'd made a terrible mistake coming here. And she thought about Victor Hale, somewhere far behind her, and prayed to a God she wasn't sure she believed in any more that the distance would be enough. It wasn't until nearly dawn that she finally fell asleep, and when she did, she dreamed of Boston, of debt collectors with frozen smiles, and of running through snow that never ended. The storm broke just before sunrise. Evelyn woke to pale gray light filtering through the shutters and the sound of Caleb moving around the cabin. He was already dressed, stoking the fire back to life, and when he noticed she was awake, he nodded toward the stove. Coffee's on. We've got work to do. She sat up, her body protesting every movement. What kind of work? The kind that keeps you alive out here. Can you handle an axe? I've never held an axe in my life. Then today you learn. Get dressed. We start in 10 minutes. There was no softness in his voice, no accommodation for the fact that she'd just arrived. But somehow, that was better than pity, better than being treated like something fragile that needed protecting. Evelyn pulled on the warmest clothes she had, which weren't nearly warm enough, and stepped outside into a world transformed. The storm had dumped 2 feet of fresh snow across the clearing. Everything was white and pristine and breathtakingly beautiful in a way that felt almost cruel. The sun was just beginning to rise over the eastern ridge, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold. Caleb was already at the woodpile, splitting logs with steady, rhythmic strikes. He didn't look up when she approached. First rule of the ridge, he said between swings. We burn 4 logs a day minimum to keep the cabin warm. That means I split 8 every morning before breakfast. Now it means we each split 4. I told you I've never. I know what you told me. Watch. He demonstrated the motion, feet shoulder width apart, controlled swing, letting the weight of the axe do the work. Then he handed it to her and stepped back. Your turn. The axe was heavier than she'd expected. The handle felt wrong in her hands, too rough, too thick. But she positioned herself the way he'd shown her, lifted the blade, and swung. The axe bounced off the log without splitting it. Again, Caleb said. She tried again. Same result. Again. By the 6th attempt, her arms were shaking and sweat was soaking through her dress despite the cold. But on the 7th swing, the log finally cracked open. Good, Caleb said simply. 3 more. It took her nearly an hour to split 4 logs. Her hands were blistered and bleeding by the time she finished, and she could barely lift her arms. But Caleb didn't offer sympathy or suggest she rest. He just moved on to the next task. By midday, Evelyn had learned how to check the well for ice, how to ration the food stores, how to read the weather by watching the pine branches, and how to navigate the clearing without losing sight of the cabin in case another storm rolled in. Every lesson was delivered in the same flat, practical tone. Every task was demonstrated once and then expected to be repeated. There was no patience for failure, but there was also no anger when she struggled. It was, she realized, exactly how you'd train someone you needed to rely on. Not a wife, a partner. By the time the sun started to set, she was exhausted in a way she'd never experienced in Boston. Every muscle ached, her hands were raw, but there was something else too, a strange satisfaction that came from knowing she'd survived the first day. They ate dinner in silence, venison stew that Caleb had made, thick and surprisingly good. Evelyn wanted to ask where he'd learned to cook, wanted to know more about this man she'd married, but the questions felt too personal for the boundary they'd established. Instead, she said, "The woman who was here before me, Rebecca, how long were you married?" Caleb's spoon paused halfway to his mouth. For a moment she thought he wasn't going to answer. Then he said, 4 years. Did you love her? Yes. What happened? He set the spoon down. She came here thinking the mountain would be an adventure, something romantic and wild. But the reality was harder than she'd imagined. The isolation broke her down winter by winter until she couldn't take it anymore. One morning I woke up and she was gone. Left a note saying she couldn't live somewhere that made her disappear. Did you try to find her? No. Why not? Because she was right. He looked directly at Evelyn for the first time since they'd sat down. This ridge makes you disappear. If you're not strong enough to hold on to who you are, the mountain takes it from you. Rebecca wasn't strong enough, so she left, and I let her go. Evelyn felt something cold settle in her stomach. Is that what you think will happen to me? I think you're tougher than you look, but I also think you're terrified of something, and fear makes people do stupid things, so I guess we'll see. The honesty was brutal, but it was also strangely comforting. At least he wasn't pretending. For what it's worth, Evelyn said quietly, I'm not looking for adventure or romance. I'm just looking for a place where no one can find me. Then you picked the right mountain. They finished dinner in silence. After, while Caleb cleaned the dishes, Evelyn stood and walked to the door, needing air despite the cold. She stepped out onto the porch and looked up at the sky. The stars were incredible. Thousands of them, maybe millions, scattered across the darkness like someone had spilled diamonds. In Boston, you could barely see a dozen stars through the smoke and city lights. But here, the sky went on forever. She heard Caleb step out behind her. Beautiful, isn't it? He said. Yes. Rebecca used to stand out here for hours some nights, just staring up. I think she was looking for something to connect to, some reminder that there was a world beyond the ridge. Did she ever find it? No, that was the problem. Evelyn turned to look at him. Do you regret bringing her here? I regret a lot of things, but regret doesn't change what happened. That's not an answer. He met her eyes. Yes, I regret it. I knew she wasn't built for this life, and I married her anyway because I was lonely and stupid and thought love would be enough. It wasn't. and she paid the price for my mistake. Is that why you want this to be practical? No expectations, no romance, so history doesn't repeat itself? Yes. Good, Evelyn said, because I'm not her, and I'm not looking to be saved or fixed or loved. I'm just looking to survive. Something shifted in Caleb's expression. Not quite approval, but close. Then maybe this will work after all, he said. They stood together in the cold for another moment, two strangers bound by law and necessity, watching the stars above Holt Ridge. And somewhere far below them, in a town neither of them was thinking about, Victor Hale received a telegram that would change everything. It read, "Found her. Black Hollow, Colorado. Married. Will collect within the week." The telegram sat on Victor Hale's mahogany desk like a coiled snake. He read it 3 times, his fingers drumming against the polished wood in a rhythm that his secretary had learned meant someone was about to have a very bad day. Outside his Boston office, rain hammered against the windows, turning the street below into a blur of gray and black. "Married," he said aloud, tasting the word. Then he laughed, a sound with no humor in it. "The little fool actually thinks a piece of paper will protect her." His secretary, a nervous man named Parsons, stood near the door with his hands clasped. "Should I arrange travel, sir?" "Not yet. First, I want to know everything about the man she married. Everything. Who he is, what he owns, what debts he carries. I want leverage before I make the trip." "Yes, sir. And if there is no leverage?" Hale smiled the way other men might bare their teeth before a fight. "There's always leverage, Parsons. You just have to know where to look." 3 days later, Hale had his answer. Caleb Mercer owned a timber claim on Holt Ridge worth almost nothing in current market value, but potentially valuable if the railroad expansion went through. He had no debts, no family, no connections to anyone who mattered. He was, by all accounts, a ghost who preferred to stay invisible, which meant he had nothing to lose. Those were always the dangerous ones. But Hale had spent 20 years building his fortune by understanding one simple truth. Everyone had a breaking point. You just had to apply the right pressure. He booked passage west the following morning. Back on Holt Ridge, Evelyn had no idea the clock was ticking. The days fell into a brutal rhythm. Wake before dawn. Split wood. Check the well. Haul water. Mend whatever broke the day before. The mountain demanded constant work, and Caleb ran the operation like a military campaign, efficient, relentless, and completely unforgiving of weakness. By the end of the first week, Evelyn's hands were calloused, and her back ached in places she didn't know could hurt. But she was learning how to read the snow for signs of incoming storms, how to keep the fire going through the night without wasting wood, how to move through the clearing without exhausting herself. And she was learning about Caleb. He didn't talk much, but she'd started to notice patterns. The way he always checked the door latch 3 times before bed. The way he kept his knife within arm's reach even inside the cabin. The way his eyes would track movement outside the window like he was expecting something to come through the trees. He was waiting for something. She just didn't know what. One morning, while they were working in silence near the woodpile, she finally asked, "What are you so afraid of?" Caleb's axe stopped mid-swing. He looked at her, his expression unreadable. "What makes you think I'm afraid of anything? You check the door 3 times every night. You keep a weapon on you at all times. You watch the tree line like you're expecting an attack. That's not caution, that's fear." He split the log in front of him with one clean strike, then reached for another. "Maybe I'm just careful. There's a difference between careful and haunted. You've been here a week and you think you know me?" "I think we're both running from something," Evelyn said quietly. "The difference is, you're running from something that already happened. I'm running from something that's still chasing me." Caleb set the axe down and turned to face her fully. "You want to know what I'm afraid of? Fine. I'm afraid of making the same mistake twice. I brought someone to this mountain who wasn't built for it, and I watched her break apart piece by piece until there was nothing left of the person she used to be. So yes, I check the door. I keep a knife close. Because if something goes wrong up here, there's no one coming to help. It's just you and me and the mountain. And the mountain doesn't care if we live or die." The raw honesty in his voice caught her off guard. For a moment, she saw past the walls he'd built and glimpsed the man underneath, someone who'd been hurt badly enough to armor himself against ever feeling it again. "I'm not Rebecca," Evelyn said. "I know that. Then stop treating me like I'm about to shatter. I'm not. You are. You watch me like you're waiting for me to fail, like you're measuring how long it'll take before I run down that mountain the same way she did. Caleb's jaw tightened. Can you blame me? No, but you can't live your whole life preparing for people to leave. Eventually you have to trust someone to stay. Trust? He laughed, but there was something broken in the sound. Trust is what got me into this mess in the first place. Then we're both stuck, aren't we? Because I can't tell you what I'm running from, and you can't stop expecting me to run. They stood facing each other in the snow, breath misting in the cold air. And Evelyn realized this was the first real conversation they'd had since the wedding. Everything else had been practical, transactional. But this felt different, dangerous even. I should get back to work, Caleb said finally, picking up the axe. But before he could swing, Evelyn spoke again. Her name was Sarah. He froze. My mother, she continued, her voice tight. She died when I was 15. Fever took her in 3 days. My father never recovered. He started drinking, gambling, making deals with men like Victor Hale who prey on desperate people. By the time I was old enough to understand what was happening, we'd lost everything. The house, the business, everything. Evelyn, Hale held the debts, all of them. And when my father couldn't pay, Hale made an offer. He'd forgive everything if I married him. 53 years old, twice widowed, and he wanted a wife young enough to be his daughter. My father was too broken to fight. He actually tried to convince me it was a good match. Her hands were shaking now, and she shoved them into her coat pockets to hide it. So I ran, took everything I could carry, and disappeared in the middle of the night. I answered your advertisement because it was the only option that put a legal contract between me and Hale. I thought if I was already married, he couldn't touch me. I thought I'd finally be safe. Caleb had gone very still. What happens if he finds you? I don't know. The debt papers have my father's signature, not mine, but Hale doesn't care about legal details. He cares about getting what he wants. And he wanted me. Wanted? Past tense? Evelyn met his eyes. I'm hoping the distance and the marriage certificate will be enough to make him move on, find some other desperate family to exploit. And if it's not? She didn't have an answer for that. The conversation hung between them, heavy and unresolved. Finally, Caleb nodded once and went back to splitting wood. But something had shifted. The wall between them had cracked just slightly, and through that crack, Evelyn saw something she hadn't expected. He believed her. And more than that, he was angry on her behalf. That night after dinner, Caleb did something he'd never done before. He brought down a box from the high shelf and set it on the table between them. Inside were letters, a few photographs, and a folded piece of paper that looked like it had been read 1,000 times. Rebecca's goodbye letter, he said, handing it to Evelyn. I kept it because I needed to remember, needed to make sure I didn't forget why she left. Evelyn unfolded the paper carefully. The handwriting was neat, almost painfully precise. Caleb, I can't do this anymore. The silence is killing me. The isolation is killing me. I wake up every morning and I don't recognize the person I see in the mirror. This mountain is taking everything I am, and if I stay any longer, there won't be anything left to save. I'm sorry. I know you love this place, but I can't love it with you. I need people. I need noise. I need to feel like I exist. Please don't come looking for me. Evelyn read it twice, then handed it back. She wasn't wrong. I know. The mountain does take things from you, but maybe what it takes is what you needed to lose anyway. Caleb looked at her sharply. What do you mean? I mean, Boston took everything from me too. My mother, my father, my future. But all those things were already broken before I lost them. Coming here didn't take anything I still had. It just put distance between me and the wreckage. He was quiet for a long moment, turning the letter over in his hands. Why are you showing me this? Evelyn asked. Because you were right earlier. I've been waiting for you to run, but that's not fair to you. You're not her, and this, he gestured between them, isn't the same situation. So I'm trying to trust that you meant what you said, that you're here to stay. I meant it. Then I need you to promise me something. What? If Hale shows up here, you tell me immediately. You don't try to handle it alone. You don't try to protect me from it. We deal with it together. Agreed? Evelyn's throat went tight. The idea of dragging Caleb into her mess felt wrong, But the alternative, facing Hale alone, felt impossible. "Agreed," she whispered. Caleb nodded and put the box away. Neither of them spoke about it again that night. But when Evelyn went to bed, she noticed something different. The chipped blue cup was gone from the shelf, and the dried flowers above the window had been taken down. Small changes, but they meant something. The second week brought a storm that lasted 4 days. They were trapped inside the cabin with nothing to do but maintain the fire and wait it out. The wind screamed against the walls, and snow piled up against the door until they had to dig themselves out every few hours just to keep from being buried alive. It was during that storm that Evelyn learned Caleb could actually hold a conversation. "Tell me about Boston," he said on the third day, when the silence had stretched so long it felt suffocating. "What do you want to know?" "Anything? I've never been east of Denver." So she told him about the harbor and the ships coming in from Europe, about the markets where you could buy anything if you had the money, about the theaters and the libraries and the way the city never truly slept. "Sounds crowded," Caleb said. It was. You couldn't walk 10 feet without bumping into someone. But that was part of the appeal. You could disappear into the crowd. Be anonymous. "You can disappear up here too." "It's different. In the city you disappear because no one's looking. Up here you disappear because there's no one to see you." "Which do you prefer?" Evelyn thought about it. "I don't know yet." "Fair enough. What about you?" she asked. "Why did you come here?" Caleb poked at the fire, sending sparks spiraling up the chimney. "Same reason as you, I guess. I was running from something." "What?" "A war that never really ended. At least not for me." Evelyn went very still. She'd noticed the scars on his hands, the way he moved like someone trained for violence, but he'd never mentioned it before. "You fought?" 4 years. Came home and realized I didn't fit anywhere anymore. The cities felt too loud. The people felt too close. I needed space, needed silence. So I came here. "Do you regret it?" "Some days. Most days, no. But there are moments when I wonder what my life would have looked like if I'd stayed, if I'd tried harder to fit back in. And then winter comes and I remember why I left. Because up here, things make sense. Work equals survival. Preparation equals safety. There's no politics, no lies, no one trying to sell you something you don't need. Just the mountain and what you make of it." "That sounds lonely." "It is. But lonely is better than broken." Evelyn understood that more than he knew. On the 5th day, the storm finally broke. They dug out the door and stepped into a world transformed. The snow was waist deep in some places, and the clearing looked like something from a painting, pristine and untouched, and almost painfully beautiful. "We need to check the roof," Caleb said. "Weight like this can collapse the whole structure." They spent the morning clearing snow, working side by side in a rhythm that had started to feel almost comfortable. Evelyn was getting stronger. The work that had nearly killed her the first week was now difficult but manageable. "You're learning fast," Caleb said at one point. "I'm motivated." "By what?" "By not wanting to die up here." He actually smiled at that, a real smile, not the half grimace she'd seen before. Fair motivation. That afternoon, while Caleb was checking the lean-to, Evelyn went inside to start preparing dinner. She was reaching for the venison when she saw it through the window. A rider. Coming up the trail through the snow. Her blood turned to ice. "Caleb," she called, trying to keep her voice steady. "Someone's coming." He appeared in the doorway instantly, his hand already on his knife. "Stay inside." "Caleb, inside. Now." She wanted to argue, but the look on his face stopped her. She stepped back from the window and watched as he moved to the center of the clearing, positioning himself between the cabin and the approaching rider. The man who emerged from the tree line wasn't Victor Hale. He was younger, mid-20s maybe, with the lean build of someone who spent more time in a saddle than on solid ground. He wore a heavy coat and had a rifle slung across his back, but his hands were visible and empty. "Caleb Mercer?" the man called out. "Who's asking?" "Name's Daniel Cross. I'm looking for my sister." Inside the cabin, Evelyn's world tilted sideways. Daniel, her younger brother, the last person she'd expected to find her up here. She was out the door before she could think twice about it. "Danny?" Her brother's face went from cautious to shocked. "Evie? What the hell are you doing? You married this man?" It's complicated. Complicated? You disappeared in the middle of the night. Father's been... He stopped, his expression darkening. Actually, Father doesn't give a damn. But I've been searching for 3 months. Do you have any idea what Hale is doing back in Boston? Evelyn felt Caleb move up beside her. Who's Hale? The man she was supposed to marry, Daniel said, his eyes never leaving his sister. The man who owns every debt Father ever signed, and the man who's currently tearing apart Boston looking for her. She's not going back, Caleb said flatly. Daniel finally looked at him, really looked at him, and Evelyn saw her brother doing the same calculation she'd done weeks ago, measuring this mountain stranger against the kind of man who could track someone across state lines. I'm not here to take her back, Daniel said carefully. I'm here to warn her. Hale's on his way. He got word about the marriage, and he's coming to contest it. He's got lawyers, Evie, good ones, and he's claiming Father signed a contract on your behalf, some kind of proxy agreement that gives him legal claim to you regardless of any subsequent marriage. That's not possible, Evelyn said, but her voice shook. Father couldn't have... He wouldn't... He was drunk. Hale had him sign a dozen things. One of them was apparently this. Caleb's hand found Evelyn's shoulder. How long until Hale gets here? He left Boston a week ago. Could be here any day now, depending on the weather. The words hit like a physical blow. Any day. Which meant she'd never been safe at all. The distance, the marriage, the mountain, none of it had been enough. What does he want? Caleb asked. Daniel's expression went cold. What men like Hale always want. Control. He convinced himself he's in love with her, but really he just can't stand losing something he decided was his. And he'll destroy anyone who gets in his way. Then he's going to have a problem, Caleb said quietly. You don't understand who you're dealing with. Victor Hale owns half of Boston. He has connections that reach all the way to Washington. Going up against him is suicide. Maybe, but he's not taking her. The certainty in Caleb's voice made something crack open in Evelyn's chest. She'd been so sure this marriage would be nothing more than a business arrangement, two strangers sharing space and nothing else. But standing here with his hand on her shoulder and his voice promising protection she didn't ask for, she realized something had changed. She just didn't know when. Daniel looked between them, his expression unreadable. You're serious about this? About her? She's my wife, Caleb said. That means something up here, even if it doesn't down in Boston. It means something in Boston, too. If Hale doesn't have legal ground to stand on, but if that contract is real, then we'll deal with it when he gets here. Until then, you're welcome to stay. There's room in the lean-to, and we've got enough supplies for 3 if we ration. Daniel hesitated, then nodded. One condition. You let me help. If Hale's coming, you're going to need all the support you can get. Fine, but your sister's safety is non-negotiable. On that, we agree. That night, the 3 of them sat around the fire while Daniel explained everything he'd learned. The contract Hale claimed to have was dated 6 months before Evelyn ran. It allegedly gave Hale guardianship rights over her in exchange for forgiving a portion of the family debt. Whether it was legally binding was debatable, but Hale had enough money to tie them up in courts for years, bleeding them dry with legal fees until Evelyn had no choice but to comply. There's one other thing, Daniel said reluctantly. Father's dead. Evelyn's breath caught. What? Hart gave out 2 weeks after you left. I think the guilt finally caught up with him. He left a letter. For you. Daniel pulled a folded envelope from his coat and handed it to her. Evelyn stared at it like it might bite. I'll leave you to read that, he said, then looked at Caleb. Can I talk to you? Outside? The 2 men stepped out onto the porch, leaving Evelyn alone with the letter. Her hands shook as she opened it. Evelyn, if you're reading this, it means Danny found you. I don't expect forgiveness. I don't deserve it. I sold you to save myself, and I'll carry that shame to whatever comes after this life. But you should know the contract Hale has is real. I signed it drunk and desperate, and I didn't understand what it meant until it was too late. By then, you were already gone. I tried to fight him, tried to get it nullified. But Hale owns too many judges, too many lawyers. I failed you, daughter. Just like I failed your mother. I'm sorry isn't enough. It'll never be enough. But it's all I have left to give. Father. Evelyn read it 3 times before the tears came. Outside, Daniel was explaining the situation to Caleb in more detail. Hale's not going to give up. Even if the contract isn't enforceable, he'll use it to make their lives hell. drag them through courts, destroy Evie's reputation, make it impossible for her to exist anywhere east of the Mississippi. Then she stays here, Caleb said. For how long? Forever? You think she's built for a lifetime on this mountain? I think she's stronger than you give her credit for. Maybe, but strength doesn't mean she belongs here. This place, it breaks people, Caleb. I've heard the stories about your first wife, about the isolation. You really want to do that to Evie? Caleb's jaw tightened. What Evelyn does is her choice, not mine, not Hale's, not yours. If she wants to leave, she can leave, but it'll be because she decided to, not because some bastard from Boston thinks he owns her. Daniel studied him for a long moment. You love her. I barely know her. That's not what I asked. Caleb didn't answer, because the truth was, he didn't know anymore. What had started as a practical arrangement had become something messier, something that made him check on her throughout the day just to make sure she was okay, something that made him furious at the thought of anyone hurting her. Just be careful, Daniel said quietly. Men like Hale don't lose gracefully, and they don't fight fair. Neither do I. Inside, Evelyn was still staring at her father's letter when the men came back in. She looked up at Caleb, and he saw something broken in her expression. He's really dead? I'm sorry, Evie, Daniel said. She nodded slowly, then carefully folded the letter and set it aside. When Hale comes, I want to face him. I'm done running. Evelyn? Caleb started. No. I've been running for months, and it hasn't solved anything. If he's going to destroy my life, I want to look him in the eye when he does it. That's not going to happen. You can't promise that. Watch me. The intensity in his voice made her breath catch. She opened her mouth to argue, but before she could, Caleb crossed the room and knelt in front of where she sat. Listen to me. I don't care what contract he has or what lawyers he brings. You're not going anywhere unless you choose to. And if you choose to stay, I'll make sure he understands what that means. And what does it mean? Caleb held her gaze. It means you're under my protection now, and I don't break promises. Evelyn felt something shift in her chest, something dangerous and warm and completely terrifying. Why? She whispered. Why would you fight for me? Because someone should have fought for you a long time ago, and since they didn't, I will. Behind them, Daniel cleared his throat awkwardly. I'm, going to check on the horses. Neither Evelyn nor Caleb noticed him leave. You don't owe me this, Evelyn said. I know. Then why? Because when I look at you, I don't see someone broken. I see someone who survived, and that matters more than you know. Evelyn's eyes burned. She'd spent so long thinking of herself as damaged goods, as someone whose value had been calculated and sold. But Caleb looked at her like she was worth protecting, worth fighting for. It terrified her. What if I can't stay? She asked. What if the mountain breaks me the way it broke Rebecca? Then you leave, and I'll make sure you get somewhere safe. But at least you'll leave by choice, not because someone forced you. The honesty in his voice undid something inside her. Before she could second-guess it, she reached out and took his hand. His skin was rough from work, scarred from years of survival, but it was warm, real. Thank you, she whispered. Caleb squeezed her hand once, then stood and moved toward the fire, putting distance between them like he needed space to breathe. And Evelyn sat there in the firelight, holding her father's final letter, and wondering if she'd just made everything infinitely more complicated. Or if complicated was exactly what she needed. Victor Hale arrived on the ridge 3 days later, and he didn't come alone. Evelyn saw them first. She'd been hauling water from the well when movement caught her eye through the trees. 3 riders picking their way up the trail, their horses struggling through snow that hadn't been broken since Daniel's arrival. The lead rider sat tall in his saddle, dressed in black wool that looked absurdly out of place against the white landscape. She didn't need to see his face to know. The bucket slipped from her hands, water splashing across the snow. Caleb, she called, her voice barely above a whisper. Then louder, Caleb! He emerged from the cabin with Daniel right behind him, both men reading the fear in her face instantly. Caleb's eyes went to the tree line, and his whole body went rigid. Get inside, he said. No. Evelyn, I said no. I'm not hiding from him. Daniel moved to her side. Evie, maybe you should... I'm done running, Danny. I meant what I said. Caleb looked like he wanted to argue, but something in her expression stopped him. Instead, he positioned himself slightly in front of her, his hand resting casually near the knife at his belt. The message was clear. Hale would have to go through him first. The riders broke through the tree line into the clearing. Victor Hale looked exactly as Evelyn remembered, tall, well-fed, with silver threading through dark hair and eyes that calculated the value of everything they saw. The two men flanking him were younger, harder, the kind hired to intimidate rather than think. One had a rifle visible across his saddle. The other kept his hand near a pistol at his hip. Hale's gaze swept across the clearing, taking in the modest cabin, the woodpile, the rough existence Evelyn had chosen over him. When his eyes finally landed on her, something cold and possessive flickered across his face. "Evelyn," he said, dismounting with practiced ease, "you've led me on quite a chase." "Mr. Hale." Her voice came out steadier than she felt. "You shouldn't have come." "Shouldn't have?" He smiled, but there was nothing warm in it. "My dear, you disappeared in the middle of the night with property that belongs to me. Of course I came. I'm not property. Legally, we can debate that. Your father signed papers? My father's dead." That stopped him, but only for a moment. "I'm aware. My condolences. Though I suspect his death was hastened by the guilt of what he'd done. Selling his daughter to save himself from debtor's prison tends to weigh on a man's conscience." Evelyn flinched, and Caleb stepped forward. "That's far enough," he said quietly. Hale's attention shifted to him for the first time, assessing him the way a predator might size up unexpected competition. "And you must be the mountain man foolish enough to marry her. Caleb Mercer, isn't it?" "What do you want, Hale?" "What's mine? Though I'm willing to be reasonable about how we resolve this situation. I understand you were deceived, that Miss Cross failed to inform you of her existing obligations before entering into marriage. I'm prepared to overlook that deception and offer compensation for the inconvenience she's caused you." "She didn't cause me any inconvenience, and she's not going anywhere." Hale's smile widened. "I don't think you understand the position you're in, Mr. Mercer. I have legal documentation that grants me guardianship over Evelyn in perpetuity. Her marriage to you, conducted without my consent as her legal guardian, is invalid, null and void, which means she has no more right to be here than a runaway servant. That contract was signed under duress by a drunk man who didn't understand what he was agreeing to," Daniel cut in. "It won't hold up in any legitimate court." "Perhaps not. But fighting it through the courts will take years. Years during which Evelyn's reputation will be thoroughly destroyed. Years during which Mr. Mercer here will be bankrupted by legal fees. Or," Hale spread his hands in mock generosity, "we can settle this now. Evelyn comes back to Boston, I forgive all outstanding debts, and everyone walks away intact. A clean solution to a messy problem. Or," Caleb said, his voice dropping to something dangerous, "you get back on your horse and ride down this mountain before I make you." One of Hale's men shifted, his hand moving toward his pistol, but Hale held up a hand, stopping him. "Violence would be unwise, Mr. Mercer. I've already filed paperwork with the territorial courts. If anything happens to me, you'll hang for it, and Evelyn will still end up exactly where she belongs, with me." "She belongs here," Caleb said. "She's my wife." "A wife you've known for what, 3 weeks, 4? You know nothing about her, nothing about the debt she carries or the obligations she's running from. I, on the other hand, have known the Cross family for years. I understand what Evelyn needs, what she's suited for." "You understand what you want her to be," Evelyn said, finding her voice again. "That's not the same thing." Hale's expression shifted, something almost resembling hurt crossing his face. "I've been patient with you, Evelyn. I forgave your father's debts when no one else would. I offered you a comfortable life, security, everything a woman could want. And you repaid that kindness by stealing away in the night like a common thief. You tried to buy me. I tried to save you. From poverty. From scandal. From exactly this, standing in the snow in the middle of nowhere, pretending you belong in a world that will kill you before spring. Better dead on my own terms than alive on yours." The words hung in the frozen air between them. Hale's face went rigid, the mask of civility cracking to reveal something uglier underneath. "You ungrateful little—" He stopped himself, took a breath, forced the smile back into place. "I see. This is about pride. You'd rather suffer with this stranger than accept help from someone who actually cares about your welfare. You don't care about me, Evelyn said. You care about winning, about not losing something you decided was yours. But I was never yours, Mr. Hale, and I never will be. Hale's eyes went cold. He reached into his coat and pulled out a folded document, holding it up like a weapon. This contract says otherwise. He's signed, witnessed, and legally binding. You can pretend all you want that your mountain marriage means something, but in the eyes of the law, you're still under my guardianship, and I'm well within my rights to take you home. Try it, Caleb said softly. See what happens. The two men stared at each other, and Evelyn felt the violence crackling in the air between them like electricity before a storm. Hale's hired men had both gone tense, hands on weapons. Daniel had moved slightly to the side, creating a better angle if this turned into a fight. It was Hale who broke first. I'm not an unreasonable man, Mr. Mercer, so let me make you an offer, a business proposition, if you will. I'm listening. The debt Evelyn's father owed me totals $18,000, a considerable sum. I'm willing to transfer that debt to you in exchange for Evelyn's freedom from this marriage. You pay it off over time, say 10 years, and she walks away clean. No legal entanglements, no ruined reputation, just a business transaction. Evelyn's stomach dropped. Caleb, no. But he was already considering it. She could see the calculation in his eyes, the same ruthless practicality that had kept him alive on this mountain for 11 years. How much up front? He asked. Caleb, don't. $5,000, the rest in annual installments. I don't have $5,000. No. But you have a timber claim worth considerably more if the railroad expansion goes through. Sign over the mineral rights and we'll call the first payment settled. Those rights are all I have. Then you have a choice to make, your livelihood or your wife. Evelyn grabbed Caleb's arm. Don't do this. He's trying to trap you. Once you sign those papers, he'll own you the same way he owned my father. The debt will never be paid. He'll keep adding fees and interest until... I know what he's doing, Caleb said quietly. He looked down at her and something in his expression made her chest tighten. But if it keeps you safe, it's worth it. It's not worth bankrupting yourself. It's not worth... Yes, it is. The certainty in his voice broke something inside her. This man who'd known her less than a month was willing to destroy himself financially to protect her. It was insane, reckless. And it made her realize with crystal clarity that what was happening between them had stopped being practical the moment she'd told him about Hale. Maybe even before that. So? Hale prompted. Do we have a deal? Caleb turned back to him. You get your money. She stays here. And you never contact either of us again. Those are my terms. Agreed. I'll have the papers drawn up and delivered within the week. In the meantime, Hale's gaze slid to Evelyn. I trust you'll keep her close. She has a habit of running. I'm not running from him, Evelyn said coldly. I'm running from you. Hale's smile turned cruel. We'll see how you feel after a winter trapped on this ridge with a man you barely know. Desperation has a way of changing perspectives. He mounted his horse with practiced grace, his men following suit. But before he turned to leave, he looked at Caleb one more time. You're making a mistake, Mr. Mercer. Evelyn is beautiful, I'll grant you that. But she's also stubborn, impractical, and completely unsuited for this kind of life. You'll regret this arrangement long before that debt is paid. Maybe, but that's my problem, not yours. Hale shook his head like he was watching a man walk off a cliff. The papers will arrive next week. I expect your signature within 24 hours of delivery. Then he wheeled his horse around and headed back down the trail, his hired men close behind. They stood in silence until the riders disappeared into the trees. Then Evelyn turned on Caleb. What the hell were you thinking? I was thinking you needed protection and I could provide it. By selling yourself into indentured servitude? That's not protection. That's suicide. It's a business arrangement, same as our marriage. Don't, her voice cracked. Don't pretend this is the same thing. This is $18,000, Caleb. That's more money than you'll make in 10 years of timber work. You can't... Already done. No, it's not. The papers haven't been signed yet. You can still back out. Tell him the deal's off and what? Let him drag you back to Boston? Let him destroy your life because I wasn't willing to pay the price? It's not your price to pay. Yes, it is. The words came out harder than he'd intended, echoing across the clearing. You're my wife. That means something. It means when someone tries to hurt you, I do something about it, even if it costs me everything. Evelyn stared at him, her eyes burning. Why? Why would you do this for me? Because someone should have done it a long time ago. And since they didn't, that's not an answer. It's the only answer I have. Daniel, who'd been standing quietly to the side, cleared his throat. I'm going to check the horses. Give you two some privacy. He disappeared around the side of the cabin, leaving Caleb and Evelyn facing each other in the snow. You can't save me by destroying yourself, Evelyn said, her voice shaking. That's not how this works. Then how does it work? Because from where I'm standing, the only options are bad or worse. At least this way, you get to choose your own life. And you get to spend the next decade working yourself to death to pay off my father's debts. How is that fair? Fair? Caleb laughed, but there was no humor in it. Nothing about any of this is fair. Your father sold you to a man who views people as property. You had to run 1,000 miles to escape. I spent 4 years watching my first wife slowly break apart because I was too stubborn to admit she didn't belong here. Fair stopped mattering a long time ago. So what? You're just going to sacrifice everything for a woman you barely know because you feel guilty about Rebecca? The question hit like a slap. Caleb went very still. Is that what you think this is? Guilt? I don't know what else it could be. We've known each other 3 weeks. We agreed this marriage would be practical, nothing more. And now you're acting like what? Like you actually care what happens to me. The words hung between them, raw and vulnerable. Caleb took a step closer, close enough that she could see the storm in his eyes. Maybe I do, he said quietly. Maybe I started caring somewhere between you splitting your first log and you refusing to take my bed. Maybe I look at you and see someone who's stronger than she knows. Someone who survived things that would have broken most people. Maybe watching you fight through these weeks has reminded me what it looks like when someone actually wants to be here. Not because they're chasing some romantic idea of frontier life, but because they're building something real. Evelyn's breath caught. Caleb, I'm not doing this because I feel guilty. I'm doing it because if I let Hale take you, I'll regret it for the rest of my life. And I've already got enough regrets. She opened her mouth to respond, but before she could, a gunshot cracked through the air. They both hit the ground on instinct, Caleb covering Evelyn with his body. Another shot. Then Daniel's voice shouting from near the lean-to. They're still here, in the trees! Caleb was up and moving before Evelyn could process what was happening. He grabbed her arm and half-dragged her toward the cabin. Inside, now! What about Danny? I'll get him. You get inside and stay away from the windows. He shoved her through the door and was gone before she could argue. Evelyn's heart hammered as she pressed herself against the wall, trying to see through the gap in the shutters. Another shot. She saw Caleb sprinting toward the lean-to in a crouch, using the woodpile for cover. Then Daniel appeared, running hard, with Caleb right behind him. They both dove through the cabin door as another bullet splintered the doorframe inches above their heads. Bar the door, Caleb ordered, already moving to the window with his rifle. Daniel slammed the heavy wooden bar into place, while Evelyn stayed low, her mind racing. What's happening? Hale's men didn't leave, Daniel said, breathing hard. They circled back through the trees. I saw them taking positions on the ridge. How many? At least 3. Maybe more. Caleb checked his rifle, his movements calm and methodical despite the chaos. He's not here to negotiate. Never was. The dead offer was just a way to keep us talking while his men got into position. Why? Evelyn asked. What does shooting at us accomplish? It accomplishes exactly what he wants. If we're dead, there's no one to contest the guardianship. He takes you back to Boston, and the whole mess disappears. The cold calculation of it made her sick. But there were witnesses. People in Black Hollow know we're married. Who's going to question a man with Hale's money and connections? He'll spin whatever story he wants. We were attacked by bandits. I went crazy and turned violent. You were tragically killed in the crossfire. Caleb's jaw tightened. He's not playing by civilized rules anymore. Another shot hit the cabin wall, and Evelyn flinched. This was happening because of her, because she'd run, because she'd thought a marriage certificate and a mountain would be enough to keep her safe. This is my fault, she whispered. No. Caleb's voice was hard. This is Hale's fault. He's the one who decided you were property to be bought and sold. He's the one who tracked you here. He's the one shooting at us. Don't take responsibility for what he chose to do. But if you hadn't run, you'd be trapped in Boston with a man who treats people like possessions. You made the right choice. Now we deal with the consequences. Daniel was at the other window, his own rifle ready. We can't stay in here forever. Eventually, they'll just burn us out or wait for our supplies to run dry. I know. So what's the plan? Caleb was quiet for a long moment, his eyes scanning the tree line where Hale's men were hidden. When he finally spoke, his voice was cold and certain. We hunt them. Evelyn's head snapped up. What? They've got us pinned down, but they don't know this ridge like I do. There's a gulch that runs along the eastern edge, cuts through the trees, and comes out behind where they're positioned. We can use it to flank them. That's insane, Daniel said. There's at least 3 of them, probably more. And they're professionals. They're hired guns used to intimidating people in cities. This is my mountain, my rules. Caleb, no. Evelyn moved toward him. This isn't, you can't just, you have a better idea? She didn't, and that terrified her more than the gunfire. We wait, she said desperately. Wait them out. Eventually they'll have to leave. And if they don't? If they're willing to sit out there for days, weeks even? We've got supplies for maybe 10 days if we ration carefully. They can resupply from town. Time is on their side, not ours. Then we surrender. Tell Hale I'll go with him. End this before anyone gets killed. Absolutely not. Caleb, I said no. He turned to face her fully, and the intensity in his expression made her breath catch. I didn't make that deal with Hale, so you could hand yourself over the first time things got difficult. You're staying here, where you're safe. How is this safe? People are shooting at us. Because I'm going to make sure they stop. He checked his ammunition, loaded his rifle, and moved toward the back of the cabin where a small window faced away from the tree line. Daniel followed, and after a moment of hesitation, so did Evelyn. Listen to me, Caleb said, his voice low and urgent. I'm going out through the back. I'll use the gulch to get behind them. Daniel, you stay here and keep them focused on the cabin. Fire off a shot every few minutes so they think we're all pinned down inside. And if they rush the cabin while you're gone? They won't. They've got cover in the trees. From their perspective, they've got all the advantage. They'll wait us out. You hope. I know. These men are mercenaries. They're not getting paid enough to risk a direct assault when they can just starve us out. Daniel didn't look convinced, but he nodded. How long? Give me 20 minutes to reach position, then start making noise. And if you're not back in an hour? Caleb met his eyes. Then take Evelyn and run. There's a trail on the north side that leads down to the valley. Rough going, but you can make it if you move fast. I'm not leaving you, Evelyn said immediately. You will, if I tell you to. Like hell I will. For a brief second, something almost like a smile crossed Caleb's face. Stubborn. You knew that when you married me. He reached out and cupped her face with one hand, his thumb brushing against her cheek. The gesture was so unexpected, so gentle compared to the violence happening around them, that Evelyn forgot how to breathe. Stay alive, he said quietly. That's all I need you to do. Stay alive until I get back. Before she could respond, he was moving, slipping out the back window with the practiced ease of someone who'd spent years hunting these mountains. And then he was gone, swallowed by the snow and trees. Evelyn stood frozen, her hand pressed against her cheek where his touch still lingered. He'll be okay, Daniel said, though he didn't sound entirely certain. He knows what he's doing. Does he? Or is he just... She couldn't finish the thought. Couldn't voice the fear that Caleb was going to get himself killed trying to protect her. Daniel moved back to the front window and fired a shot toward the trees. The answer came immediately, 3 shots slamming into the cabin wall. At least we know they're still there, he muttered. The next 20 minutes were the longest of Evelyn's life. She stayed low, listening to the periodic gunfire, watching the tree line for any sign of movement. Her mind kept circling back to Caleb out there alone, outnumbered and outgunned, risking everything because he'd decided she was worth protecting. She barely knew him. 3 weeks wasn't enough time to know anyone, not really. But she knew he checked the door 3 times every night. Knew he split wood with the same methodical rhythm every morning. Knew he carried scars from a war that had never really ended for him. And she knew that somewhere in the past 3 weeks, he'd stopped being just the stranger she'd married and become someone she couldn't imagine losing. When the first scream came from the woods, both Evelyn and Daniel jumped. It was followed by shouting, then 2 rapid gunshots, then silence. "What happened?" Evelyn whispered. "I don't know, but something's changed." They waited, tense and listening. Minutes crawled by with agonizing slowness. Then the cabin door rattled. Daniel swung his rifle toward it, finger on the trigger. "Who's there?" "It's me," Caleb's voice came through. "Let me in." Daniel lifted the bar and yanked the door open. Caleb stumbled inside, breathing hard, his coat torn and blood on his hands. But he was alive. Evelyn was across the room before she could think, checking him for injuries. "Are you hurt? Where's the blood from?" "Not mine. One of them tried to rush me. Had to—" He stopped, shook his head. "They're gone. The ones that are left, anyway." "How many?" "There were 4. 2 ran when they realized they'd been flanked. One's not running anywhere anymore. And the 4th—" Caleb's expression went hard. "The 4th is Hale's problem now." Daniel understood first. "You sent one back as a message." "I did. Told him to tell Hale that if he sets foot on this ridge again, he won't leave it. And I gave him something to make sure Hale believes it." He pulled a document from inside his coat, the guardianship contract, now stained with blood and torn nearly in half. "I took it off the body," Caleb said flatly. "Without this, Hale has no legal claim. It's his word against ours. And given what just happened here, I doubt he'll want this fight to go any further." Evelyn stared at the ruined contract, her mind struggling to process what had just happened. "You killed someone." "Yes. Because of me. Because they were shooting at us. Because Hale sent them here to kill us if we didn't cooperate. Don't make this about you. This is about him." But Evelyn couldn't shake the weight of it. Someone was dead. Others had fled in terror, all because she'd run from a marriage she didn't want. "Hey." Caleb's voice was gentle now, and he tilted her chin up so she had to meet his eyes. "You didn't cause this. Hale did. You understand me? This isn't on you." She wanted to believe him. But the blood on his hands told a different story. Daniel cleared his throat. "What do we do now?" "Now we wait. See if Hale's smart enough to cut his losses or stupid enough to come back." "And if he comes back?" Caleb's expression went cold. "Then I finish what he started." Hale didn't come back that day, or the next, or the one after that. But his absence felt worse than his presence. It hung over the cabin like smoke, choking and inescapable. Evelyn found herself watching the tree line constantly, jumping at shadows, unable to shake the feeling that he was out there somewhere, waiting. Caleb had changed too. The violence he'd committed, necessary as it might have been, had left marks that weren't visible on the surface. He worked harder than before, pushing himself through exhaustion, chopping wood until his hands bled, checking the perimeter at all hours like he expected an army to come pouring through the trees. On the 4th night after the attack, Evelyn woke to find his side of the floor empty. She pulled on her coat and found him outside on the porch, staring into the darkness with his rifle across his lap. "Can't sleep?" she asked. He didn't turn around. "Go back inside. It's cold." "So are you." "I'm fine." "You're not." She sat down beside him, ignoring the bite of frozen wood through her coat. "You haven't slept more than a few hours since it happened." "I sleep enough." "Caleb, I killed a man, Evelyn." The words came out flat and empty. "Shot him in the trees while he was trying to flank us. Watched him fall. And the worst part? I'd do it again without hesitation. That's what this place does to you. It strips away everything civilized until all that's left is survival." She was quiet for a moment, processing that. "You think you're becoming something you're not?" "I think I already am something I'm not proud of." "Because you protected us? Because you did what you had to do?" "Because I didn't feel anything when I pulled that trigger. No guilt, no remorse, just the relief that it was him instead of you." Evelyn understood then. He wasn't haunted by the killing itself. He was haunted by how easy it had been, by what that said about who he'd become after 11 years alone on this mountain. "During the war," she said carefully, "did you feel anything then?" His hands tightened on the rifle. "No." "And after?" "Everything, all at once. Until I couldn't stand being around people anymore because all I could see was what I'd done to them, what we'd all done to each other." He finally looked at her, and in the moonlight his eyes were hollow. I came here because I thought if I got far enough away from civilization, I could outrun it. But you can't outrun what you are. And what are you? Broken. Same as this mountain. Same as everyone who ends up here. Evelyn reached out and took his hand, ignoring the way he flinched at the contact. You're not broken. You're just someone who's survived things that would have killed other people. There's a difference. Is there? Yes. Because broken things can't protect anyone. But you protected me. You protected Danny. You stood between us and armed men because you decided we were worth fighting for. That's not broken. That's just... She struggled for the right word. That's just human. Caleb stared down at their joined hands like he couldn't quite believe they were real. I don't deserve you defending me. Maybe not, but I'm doing it anyway. They sat in silence after that, watching the stars wheel slowly overhead. The temperature dropped further, and eventually Evelyn started shivering despite her coat. Caleb noticed immediately. You should go inside. Not without you. I need to keep watch. Then I'll keep watch with you. He looked like he wanted to argue, but something in her expression stopped him. Instead, he shifted slightly, opening his coat. Come here. Evelyn hesitated only a second before moving closer, letting him wrap the heavy fabric around both of them. His body heat was immediate and overwhelming, cutting through the cold like a promise. She could feel his heartbeat against her shoulder, steady and strong. Thank you, she whispered. For what? For not giving up on me. Even when it would have been easier. His arm tightened around her. Easier doesn't mean better. They stayed like that until dawn started painting the eastern sky pink and gold. And when they finally went inside, something fundamental had shifted between them. The practical arrangement they'd agreed to was gone. What remained was messier, more complicated, and absolutely terrifying. But it was real. Daniel left 2 days later. I need to get back to Boston, he explained over breakfast. Make sure Father's affairs are properly settled. And someone needs to spread the word about what Hale tried to do up here. He gets away with this kind of thing because no one ever challenges him publicly. It's dangerous, Evelyn said. If he's angry enough, he won't touch me. Too visible. I'm not the one who humiliated him. Daniel glanced at Caleb. But you two need to be careful. Men like Hale don't forgive. They just wait for better opportunities. Let him wait, Caleb said. He steps foot on this ridge again, he won't get the chance to regret it. Daniel stood and pulled his sister into a tight hug. You're really staying? I'm really staying. Even after everything that just happened? Evelyn pulled back and looked at Caleb, who was studiously focused on his coffee. Especially after everything that just happened. Her brother studied her face, reading things she wasn't ready to say out loud. Then he smiled. You love him. I barely know him. That's not what I asked. She didn't have an answer for that. Or rather, she did. But admitting it felt like giving up the last piece of armor protecting her heart. Be safe, Danny. You too, Evie. He shook Caleb's hand, mounted his horse, and disappeared down the trail. And just like that, Evelyn and Caleb were alone again. The silence felt different now. Heavier. Like they were both waiting for the other to acknowledge what was happening between them, but neither quite brave enough to speak first. It was Caleb who finally broke. We need to talk about the debt. Evelyn had been dreading this conversation. Hale's gone. The contract's destroyed. There is no debt. There's still $18,000 your father owed. That doesn't disappear just because Hale gave up on collecting. You're not responsible for my father's mistakes. No, but I made a promise, and I keep my promises. That promise was made under duress. It doesn't count. Caleb set down his coffee and looked at her directly. I'm going to pay it. Not because Hale's holding it over us, but because it's the right thing to do. Your father's creditors deserve to be made whole. With what money? You just said yourself the timber claim barely turns a profit. Then I'll make it turn a profit. Expand operations, hire help, work the claim harder. That's insane. You'll kill yourself trying. Better than living with the knowledge that I let someone else's debts go unpaid. Evelyn wanted to scream or cry, or both. This isn't about honor. This is about you punishing yourself for something that isn't your fault. Maybe. But I'm doing it anyway. Then I'm helping. That stopped him. What? You heard me? If you're going to work yourself to death paying off my father's debts, then I'm working alongside you. Equal partners. Evelyn, don't. Don't tell me I'm not strong enough or that this isn't my responsibility. We're married. That means your debts are my debts. Your work is my work. You don't get to shut me out just because you've decided to martyr yourself. Caleb stared at her for a long moment. Then, incredibly, he smiled. You really are stubborn. I learned from the best. Fair enough. But if we're doing this, we do it smart. No more just surviving. We actually build something worth keeping. Agreed. So where do we start? Over the next week, they made plans. Real plans. Not just day-to-day survival. Caleb explained the timber business, which trees to cut, which to leave, how to navigate the seasonal markets in the valley towns. Evelyn took notes, asked questions, pushed back when his ideas seemed too conservative. We could double production if we built a sluice system, she said one night, sketching rough diagrams on scrap paper. Use the creek to transport logs instead of hauling them individually. That would require significant upfront investment. So we get a loan, use the land as collateral. I don't take loans. Why not? Because debt is what destroyed your family. I won't make the same mistake. Evelyn set down her pencil. My father's problem wasn't debt. It was gambling and drinking and making deals with predators like Hale. That's completely different from strategic investment in a profitable business. Is it? Yes. One is running from problems. The other is building towards solutions. Caleb considered that, then nodded slowly. All right, but we do it careful. Small loan, conservative terms, and we don't expand faster than we can sustain. Agreed. They shook on it, and Evelyn felt something shift. They weren't just surviving anymore. They were planning, building, creating something that might actually outlast them. But the work itself was brutal. Winter hit hard in late November, dumping snow faster than they could clear it. The temperatures dropped so low that water froze solid in the well overnight. Caleb taught Evelyn how to work in the killing cold, how to keep moving, how to recognize frostbite before it became permanent, how to push through exhaustion when stopping meant freezing. Some days she wanted to quit, to walk down that mountain and never look back. But she didn't, because every time she considered giving up, she'd see Caleb pushing just as hard, working just as long, and refusing to let the mountain break him. And she'd remember why she'd come here in the first place. Not to hide, to rebuild. The accident happened on a Tuesday. Caleb had gone out before dawn to check a stand of timber they'd marked for cutting. The snow had been falling steadily all night, and visibility was poor. Evelyn had argued against him going alone, but he'd insisted the work couldn't wait. She should have pushed harder. By mid-morning, when he still hadn't returned, panic started creeping in. She dressed in her warmest clothes, grabbed rope and supplies, and headed toward the timber stand. She found him a mile from the cabin, half buried in snow near the frozen creek. Caleb! She ran toward him, her heart hammering. Caleb, can you hear me? He groaned, trying to push himself up. Ice broke, fell through. His clothes were soaked. In temperatures this cold, that was a death sentence if they didn't move fast. Can you walk? Don't know. Legs hurt, might be broken. Evelyn assessed the situation with brutal practicality. He was too heavy for her to carry. The cabin was too far, and staying here meant they'd both freeze. We're going to get you up, she said, her voice steadier than she felt. On 3. 1. Evelyn, just go. Get help. There is no help. It's just us. So we're doing this together. 2. If you try to move me and I can't walk, we'll both die out here. Then we die together. 3. She hauled him up with strength she didn't know she had. He screamed when his weight hit the injured leg, but he stayed upright. Together, they started the agonizing journey back to the cabin. It took over an hour to cover a mile. Caleb was shaking violently by the time they reached the door, his lips blue, his eyes glassy. Evelyn got him inside and immediately started stripping off his frozen clothes with shaking hands. Fire, she muttered. Need to get the fire going. But her hands wouldn't cooperate. She'd been out in the cold too long herself, and fine motor control was gone. She fumbled with the kindling, dropping it twice before finally getting a small flame started. Once the fire was blazing, she turned her attention back to Caleb. His leg was swelling badly, already turning purple. Broken, definitely. Maybe worse. I need to set it, she said. You don't know how. I'll figure it out. We don't have a choice. She found the medical supplies, basic as they were, and the whiskey Caleb kept for emergencies. She made him drink half the bottle, then waited for the alcohol to dull the worst of the pain. "This is going to hurt," she warned. "Everything already hurts." She positioned herself at his ankle, hands shaking. "On 3? Just do it." Evelyn pulled. Hard. Caleb's scream echoed off the cabin walls, but she felt the bone shift back into alignment. She splinted it as best she could with wood and torn fabric, then wrapped him in every blanket they owned. By the time she finished, she was shaking so hard she could barely stand. But Caleb was alive. Unconscious, maybe hypothermic, but alive. She collapsed beside him near the fire and waited. He woke hours later, disoriented and in obvious pain. "What happened?" "You fell through the ice. I brought you back. Set your leg." "You—" He tried to sit up, winced, fell back. "You should have left me." "Stop saying that. I'm serious. You risked your life, and I'd do it again. Stop trying to make yourself expendable. You're not." Caleb stared at her, and something broke in his expression. "Why? Why would you do that for me?" The question hung between them, demanding an answer Evelyn had been avoiding for weeks. "Because I love you, you stubborn fool." The words came out raw and unplanned, stripped of any artifice or pretense, and once they were out, she couldn't take them back. Didn't want to. "I know we agreed this would be practical," she continued, her voice shaking. "I know we said no expectations. But somewhere between splitting wood and fighting off Hale's men and planning timber operations, I stopped being able to imagine my life without you in it. So yes, I risked my life to save yours, because losing you would be worse than dying." Caleb reached up with trembling fingers and pulled her down beside him. "You're going to regret this." "Probably." "I'm difficult. Damaged. I live on a mountain that tries to kill people." "I know. And I have no idea how to be what you need." "Then we'll figure it out together." He kissed her then, desperate and clumsy and absolutely perfect. And Evelyn kissed him back, pouring 3 weeks of fear and hope and stubborn determination into it. When they finally broke apart, Caleb was smiling, actually smiling. "I love you too," he said, in case that wasn't obvious. "It wasn't. You're terrible at showing emotion." "Then I'll have to work on that." "You really will." They lay together near the fire, broken and exhausted and more alive than either of them had felt in years. Outside, the storm raged on, but inside, something warm and fragile and worth protecting had finally taken root. Caleb's recovery took weeks. The leg healed slowly, and infection was a constant threat in the primitive conditions. Evelyn learned to change bandages, monitor for fever, and force him to rest even when he insisted he could work. It was frustrating for both of them, him because he hated being helpless, her because running the operation alone was nearly impossible. But they managed. Evelyn took over the daily work, chopping wood and hauling water and maintaining the cabin. Her hands, already calloused from weeks of labor, developed new layers of toughness. Her back grew stronger, and slowly, impossibly, she started to understand what Caleb had meant about the mountain demanding everything. Because it did. Every single day the ridge took whatever she had to give and asked for more. But it also gave something back. A sense of accomplishment, of capability, of knowing she could survive things that would have destroyed the person she'd been back in Boston. One night, while she was helping Caleb change position to ease the pressure on his leg, he caught her hand. "I need to tell you something." "What?" "About Rebecca. About why she really left." Evelyn went still. They'd avoided talking about his first wife since the night he'd shown her the goodbye letter. "You don't have to—" "I do. Because you deserve to know what you're signing up for." He took a breath, organizing his thoughts. "Rebecca came here full of dreams. She thought we'd build something beautiful together, a little paradise away from the world. And for the first year it was good, hard, but good. We worked together, laughed together, made plans. What changed? Winter. The first real winter. She'd experienced cold before, but not like this. Not the kind that gets inside your bones and stays there. Not the isolation. By February, she'd stopped talking, just went through the motions like a ghost. I tried everything, brought her books from town, suggested we leave for a while, begged her to tell me what she needed, but she'd already decided. This place was killing her, and staying would mean choosing me over herself. So she left. And I let her go because I realized something. I'd brought her here because I loved her, But love isn't enough if the life you're offering is slowly destroying the person you love. Evelyn understood what he wasn't saying. He was giving her an out, a chance to leave before the mountain took more than she was willing to give. "I'm not her," Evelyn said quietly. "I know. No, I mean, I'm not staying because I don't have other options. I'm staying because I want to. Because this place, as brutal as it is, makes sense to me in a way Boston never did. There's no pretense here, no performance, just work and survival and building something real. And when the isolation gets to you, when you wake up one day and realize you haven't seen another person in months, then I'll tell you, and we'll figure it out together. But I'm not running, not from this, not from you." Caleb pulled her close, burying his face in her hair. "I don't deserve you." "Probably not, but you're stuck with me anyway." By December, Caleb was mobile again, though he still limped badly. They celebrated by making their first timber delivery since the accident, a small load, but enough to prove they could still operate. The buyer in the valley town was surprised to see Evelyn handling negotiations. "Didn't know Mercer had a partner," he said. "Wife," Evelyn corrected, "and I handle the business side while he manages operations." The buyer raised his eyebrows but didn't argue. They settled on a fair price, and Evelyn walked away with enough money to buy supplies and make a small payment toward her father's debts. On the ride back up the mountain, Caleb was quiet. "What?" Evelyn finally asked. "Nothing. Just thinking." "About?" "About how you handled that negotiation. Got a better price than I usually do." "That's because you undervalue your own work. These buyers know you'll take whatever they offer, because you don't want to haggle." "And you do?" "I grew up in Boston. Haggling is a survival skill." He laughed, a real laugh, full and genuine. "We make a good team." "Yeah, we do." They made it back to the ridge just as snow started falling again, but this time the approaching storm didn't feel threatening. It just felt like home. That night, wrapped together under the quilts with the fire crackling, Evelyn asked the question that had been nagging at her for weeks. "What happens when the debt is paid? What do we do then?" Caleb was quiet for a moment. "What do you want to do?" "I don't know. I never thought past surviving." "Me neither." "That's not particularly helpful." He shifted to look at her, his expression serious. "I think we build. Keep expanding the operation. Maybe bring in help. Turn this into something sustainable that doesn't require us to work ourselves to death. And then? And then we live. Actually live, not just survive. Maybe travel during the off-season. See some of the world beyond this mountain." "You'd leave the ridge?" "For you? Yeah, I would." Evelyn's throat went tight. "What if I don't want to leave?" "Then we stay. Build a life here. Whatever you want, we'll figure it out together." She kissed him then, slow and deep, trying to convey everything she couldn't quite put into words. When they broke apart, she rested her forehead against his. "I was so scared when I came here. Scared of hail, scared of the mountain, scared of what would happen if I stopped running. And now? Now I'm terrified for completely different reasons. Like what? Like how much I need you. Like what would happen if I lost you. Like the fact that this mountain that was supposed to be temporary has become the only place I want to be." Caleb pulled her closer. "Good terrified or bad terrified?" "I'm not sure there's a difference anymore." He laughed softly. "Fair enough." They fell asleep like that, tangled together, while the snow continued to fall outside. And for the first time since arriving on Holt Ridge, Evelyn didn't dream about running. She dreamed about staying. Spring came late to Holt Ridge that year, but when it finally arrived, it came with a vengeance. The snow melted in rushing torrents, turning the creek into a roaring river and the trails into muddy channels that tested every skill Evelyn had learned over the winter. But with the thaw came opportunity. The timber they'd cut during the frozen months could finally be moved, and buyers from 3 different valley towns sent word they were interested in purchasing. Evelyn stood on the porch one morning in early April, watching the sunrise paint the mountains gold, and realized she couldn't remember the last time she'd thought about Boston. The city that had once defined her entire world now felt like something from someone else's life, a story she'd heard but never lived. "You're up early," Caleb said, stepping out beside her with 2 cups of coffee. "Couldn't sleep. Too much to do." He handed her one of the cups and leaned against the railing. His legs still bothered him on cold mornings, probably always would, but he'd stopped complaining about it weeks ago. We could hire help, take some of the pressure off. With what money? We've got enough saved now. Between the winter cuts and the deal you negotiated in March, we're actually ahead for the first time in years. Evelyn sipped her coffee, considering. The idea of bringing someone else onto the ridge felt strange. This place had become theirs in a way she hadn't expected, a private world where they'd built something from nothing. Sharing it seemed almost like a betrayal. What kind of help? She asked finally. Seasonal workers? People who need the work but aren't looking to stay permanent. They come up during cutting season, help process the timber, then head back down when winter hits. You've thought about this. I've thought about a lot of things, like how you're working yourself to exhaustion, and I can't do half of what I used to because of this damn leg. Like how we're never going to pay off that debt if we can't scale up operations. Like how... He stopped, then continued quieter. Like how I want you to have a life that's more than just survival. Evelyn set down her coffee and turned to face him. I have a life. With you. That's enough. Is it? Because I see the way you look at the books Daniel sends, the way you read about what's happening in the world outside this mountain. You miss it, the culture, the people, the possibilities. I miss parts of it, she admitted. But missing something doesn't mean I want to go back to it. There's a difference. Then what do you want? It was a question she'd been asking herself for months. What did she want now that survival wasn't the only goal? Now that she'd proven she could live on this ridge, what came next? I want to build something that matters, she said slowly. Not just for us, something bigger. Something that proves people like Hale don't get to decide how other people's stories end. Caleb studied her face. What are you thinking? I'm thinking there are probably other women like me. Women running from men who think they own them. Women who need a place to disappear while they figure out what comes next. What if we made this ridge into something more than just a timber operation? Like what? Like a way station. A place where people can work and earn money and rebuild their lives without anyone asking questions about where they came from. The idea had been forming in her mind for weeks, crystallizing every time she thought about how close she'd come to ending up as Hale's property. How many other women were trapped in the same situation with no way out? Caleb was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, that would be dangerous. If word got out that we were harboring runaways, we wouldn't be harboring anyone. We'd be offering employment, legal, legitimate work in exchange for fair wages. What people choose to do with that opportunity is their business. Hale would see it as a direct challenge. Good, let him. Caleb's mouth quirked into something almost like a smile. You're serious about this. Completely. We've got the land. We've got the work. And we've got experience with exactly the kind of situation these women would be running from. Why shouldn't we use that to help others? Because it would make us a target. Every powerful man who's ever lost control of a woman would see us as a threat. So we protect ourselves. We build smart. We make this place strong enough that threats don't matter. Caleb looked out at the ridge. At the cabin they'd fortified, the operation they'd expanded, the life they'd carved from nothing. Then he looked back at her. All right, we'll try it, but we do it carefully, one person at a time. And if it becomes too dangerous, then we adapt. But we don't stop. Agreed? Agreed. They shook on it, the same way they'd sealed every major decision since becoming partners. And Evelyn felt something settle in her chest. This was what she'd been searching for without knowing it. Not just safety, not just survival, but purpose. The first person they hired was a woman named Sarah Thompson. She arrived in May, sent by Daniel, who'd apparently been spreading word through certain Boston circles about the opportunities available on Holt Ridge. Sarah was 42, rail thin, with a scar running down the left side of her face and eyes that had seen too much. I can work, she said bluntly when Evelyn met her at the base of the trail. I'm strong. I don't complain. And I don't ask questions. Good. Because we don't answer them, Evelyn replied. You work, you get paid, you keep whatever privacy you need. That's the deal. Sarah's shoulders relaxed fractionally. When do I start? Now. You can bunk in the lean-to we just finished. Meals are communal. Work starts at dawn. Over the next week, Sarah proved herself worth 10 men half her age. She could split wood faster than Caleb, haul water without breaking a sweat, and work from sunup to sundown without complaint. At night, she kept to herself, reading by firelight and never volunteering information about where she'd come from or what she was running from. Evelyn didn't push. She recognized the walls Sarah had built because she'd built the same ones herself not that long ago. But one evening, while they were working together to repair a section of fencing, Sarah finally spoke. "My husband used to beat me. For 17 years. Everyone knew. No one helped. Then one night I fought back. Put a kitchen knife through his shoulder. He lived, but the law didn't care that I was defending myself. They cared that I'd assaulted a respected businessman, so I ran." Evelyn's hand stilled on the fence post. "I'm sorry. Don't be. Best thing I ever did was run. Only regret is that I didn't do it sooner." Sarah drove a nail home with one precise strike. "Your brother told me about Hale, about what he tried to do. That true?" "Yes." "And Caleb really took you in? No expectations?" "He did." Sarah nodded slowly. "Then you're lucky. Most men aren't like that." "I know." They worked in silence for a few more minutes. Then Sarah said, "The other women your brother's sending, they're going to be scared, broken. Some of them won't know how to do anything useful. You prepared for that? We'll teach them. And if they can't learn, if they're too damaged." Evelyn met her eyes. "Then we help them anyway. Everyone deserves a chance to start over." Sarah smiled, the first real smile Evelyn had seen from her. "You really believe that?" "I have to. Otherwise, what was the point of surviving?" By June, they had 4 more women working the ridge. Each came with her own scars, her own story, her own reasons for needing to disappear. Evelyn learned their names but never pushed for details. What mattered was the work, the wages, and the understanding that Holt Ridge was a place where the past didn't have to define the future. The operation expanded faster than Evelyn had anticipated. With more hands, they could process more timber, take on bigger contracts, and actually start making real money. The debt that had seemed impossible 6 months ago was suddenly manageable. They made their first major payment in July, $5,000 that wiped out nearly a third of what they owed. Caleb stood at the bank in the valley town, staring at the receipt like he couldn't quite believe it was real. "We did it," he said quietly. "We're doing it," Evelyn corrected. "Still a long way to go." "Yeah, but for the first time I actually believe we'll get there." They celebrated that night with whiskey and a fire that burned bright enough to be seen from the valley. The women who worked the ridge gathered around, sharing stories and songs and the kind of easy camaraderie that came from shared purpose. Sarah raised her cup. "To Evelyn and Caleb, for building something worth staying for." The others echoed the sentiment, and Evelyn felt tears prick her eyes. These women, these survivors, had become something like family. Broken and imperfect and still figuring things out, but family nonetheless. Late that night, after everyone else had gone to bed, Caleb found Evelyn still sitting by the fire. "You should rest," he said. "Tomorrow's another long day." "I know, I needed a minute to process. 6 months ago, I was running for my life. Now I'm running a business that's actually helping people. It doesn't feel real." Caleb sat beside her. "It's real. You made it real." "We made it real." "No. This was your vision. I just helped execute it." Evelyn leaned against his shoulder. "We're good together at this whole partnership thing." "Yeah, we are." He was quiet for a moment, then said, "I want to marry you again." She pulled back to look at him. "We're already married." "I know, but that first ceremony, that was about survival, about legal protection. I want to do it again, not because we have to, because we want to, because I love you, and I want everyone to know it." Evelyn's throat went tight. "You want a real wedding. I want to stand in front of these women we've brought together and promise you everything I should have promised the first time. Love, partnership, a future built on more than just necessity." "Caleb Mercer, are you getting sentimental on me?" "Maybe. Is that a problem?" She kissed him then, deep and thorough, and full of every emotion she'd been holding back. When they finally broke apart, she was smiling. "Yes, let's do it. Let's have a real wedding." They held the ceremony in August, on the ridge, with everyone gathered in the clearing. There was no preacher this time, just Sarah, who'd been ordained years ago in a different life, and the community they'd built standing witness. Caleb wore the same borrowed suit from the first wedding, But this time Evelyn wore a dress Sarah had helped her sew from fabric they'd brought up from the valley. It wasn't fancy, the stitching was uneven, and the hem dragged slightly in the dirt, but it was hers, made by her own hands and the hands of women who understood what it meant to build something new from broken pieces. When Sarah asked Caleb if he took Evelyn as his wife, he didn't just say yes. He spoke from the heart. I take you as my partner, my equal. The person who taught me that strength isn't about surviving alone. It's about choosing to build something with someone else. I promise to stand beside you, to listen when you speak, to fight for you when you need protecting, and trust you to fight for yourself when you don't. I promise that whatever comes next, we face it together. Evelyn's turn was harder. She'd never been good with words, never trusted herself to speak the things that mattered most. But standing here in front of these women, in front of the man who'd given her a chance when no one else would, she found the words anyway. When I came here, I was running. From a man who thought he owned me. From a life that had become a cage. I thought if I could just get far enough away, I'd be free. But you taught me something, Caleb. Freedom isn't about distance. It's about choice. And every day, I choose you. I choose this ridge. I choose the life we're building. Not because I have to, because I want to. Because loving you taught me what it means to be brave enough to stay. There wasn't a dry eye in the clearing. When Sarah pronounced them married, Caleb pulled Evelyn close and kissed her like they were the only two people in the world. And for that moment, they were. The celebration lasted into the night. Someone had brought a fiddle up from the valley, and they danced under the stars until exhaustion and joy became indistinguishable. Evelyn watched the women who worked the ridge laughing and spinning and looking more alive than they probably had in years, and she understood something fundamental. This was what freedom looked like. Not perfection, not safety, just the chance to choose your own path and live with the consequences. Victor Hale returned one final time in September, but he didn't come with guns this time. He came alone, looking older than Evelyn remembered, tired, like the intervening months had taken something essential from him. Caleb met him at the tree line, rifle in hand. "You're not welcome here." "I know." Hale dismounted slowly. "I'm not here to cause trouble. I need to speak with Evelyn. 5 minutes. Then I'll leave and never come back." Caleb looked back at the cabin where Evelyn was watching from the porch. She nodded, and he reluctantly stepped aside. Hale walked forward, stopping 10 feet from the porch. Up close, the changes were even more obvious. His expensive clothes hung loose on a frame that had lost considerable weight. His hair had gone more gray than silver, and his eyes, those calculating, predatory eyes, looked empty. "You've built something here," he said, looking around at the expanded operation, the additional structures, the women working in the distance. "I underestimated you." "Was that all you came to say?" "No, I came to—" He stopped, struggled with something internal, then continued. "I came to apologize for what I tried to do, for how I treated you, for believing I had any right to you just because your father owed me money." Evelyn descended the porch steps slowly. "Why now?" "Because I lost everything. The reputation I spent 20 years building, the connections, the respect. Your brother made sure everyone in Boston knew what I'd tried to do up here. And it turned out people have limits. Even people who'd tolerated my other behaviors drew the line at attempted murder. Good. I deserve that. I deserve worse." He reached into his coat and pulled out a leather portfolio. "These are the original debt documents, all of them. I'm forgiving the entire amount." Evelyn stared at the portfolio like it might be a trap. "Why?" "Because I can't undo what I did. Can't take back the fear I caused or the violence I ordered. But I can at least make sure you're free of any financial obligation to me. Consider it my final act before leaving Boston permanently." "Where will you go?" "West. Maybe California. Somewhere I can start over without my past following me." He set the portfolio on the porch railing. "I don't expect forgiveness. I don't deserve it. But I wanted you to know that you were right about everything. I didn't love you. I loved the idea of owning something beautiful that everyone else wanted. And it took losing everything to understand how toxic that was." Evelyn picked up the portfolio and flipped through the documents. They were legitimate. Signed, notarized, with clear language releasing her and Caleb from all debts. After months of planning and working and scraping together payments, the burden was simply gone. Thank you, she said finally. Hale nodded. Take care of yourself, Evelyn. You've built something remarkable here. Don't let anyone, including yourself, destroy it. He mounted his horse and rode back down the trail. They watched until he disappeared completely, swallowed by the forest and the gathering dusk. Caleb moved to stand beside Evelyn. Do you believe him? About the apology? I don't know. Maybe. People can change, or at least recognize what they've become. She handed him the portfolio. Either way, we're free. Actually free. No debt, no obligation, just the life we choose to build. Caleb stared at the documents and she saw the exact moment it hit him. The weight he'd been carrying for months, the responsibility, the burden, the fear that they'd spend decades paying for her father's mistakes, simply dissolved. We're free, he repeated, like he was testing the words. We're free. He pulled her close, burying his face in her hair, and Evelyn felt him shake with something that might have been laughter or tears, or both. That night they gathered everyone in the clearing and told them what had happened. The women cheered and embraced and celebrated like they'd won a war. Because in a way, they had. They'd proven that men like Hale didn't get the final word, that running wasn't the same as losing, that building something new was always possible, even when the past seemed determined to destroy you. Sarah pulled Evelyn aside later, while the celebration was still going strong. What will you do now? She asked. Now that the debt's gone? Keep building, expand the operation, help more women find their way here. Maybe eventually build a real community, something permanent that outlasts all of us. That's ambitious. So was surviving this ridge alone, so was standing up to Hale. I'm done thinking small. Sarah smiled. Good, because some of us are thinking about staying permanent, if you'll have us. Permanently? I thought everyone was just here for seasonal work. That was before we saw what you and Caleb built. Before we understood this could be more than just a place to hide. This could be home. Evelyn looked around at the women gathered by the fire, at their faces lit by flames and laughter, and the kind of hope that only came from surviving the unsurvivable. These were her people, not by blood or circumstance, but by choice. Then stay, she said. All of you, we'll figure it out together. Winter came again, as it always did on Holt Ridge. But this time, Evelyn wasn't afraid. The operation had grown beyond anything she'd imagined. 12 women now worked the ridge full-time, with more expected in the spring. They'd built additional cabins, expanded the timber processing, and established trade relationships with towns 3 valleys over. The money was good, the work was hard, but the community they'd created was something none of them had experienced before. A place where your past didn't matter, and your future was whatever you chose to make it. On a cold December morning, Evelyn stood on the porch with Caleb, watching snow fall across the clearing. She thought about the woman who'd arrived here nearly a year ago, terrified, desperate, running from a life that had tried to destroy her. That woman felt like a stranger now. Do you ever regret it? Caleb asked quietly. Answering that advertisement? Coming here? Never. Not even on the hardest days. Not even when you're freezing and exhausted and missing the comforts of civilization? Not even then. Because those comforts came with a price I wasn't willing to pay. This life, this hard, brutal, beautiful life, is mine. I chose it. That matters more than comfort ever could. Caleb pulled her close. I'm glad you came here. Glad you answered. Glad you stayed. Me too. They stood together in the cold. 2 people who'd found each other in the most unlikely circumstances and built something that defied every expectation. Around them, the ridge hummed with life and purpose. Smoke curled from cabin chimneys. Women's voices drifted through the snow. The steady rhythm of axes biting into wood echoed across the clearing. This was what freedom sounded like. Not silence or solitude, but the noise of people building their own futures on their own terms. What do you think happens next? Evelyn asked. I don't know, but I know we'll face it together. Good answer. I've been practicing. She laughed and kissed him, and the sound of it carried across the ridge like a promise. That no matter what storms came, they'd weather them. That no matter how hard the mountain pushed back, they'd push harder. That love, real love, built on choice and respect and stubborn determination, was stronger than fear, stronger than debt, stronger than the men who thought they could own other people's lives. Years later, when travelers came through the territory and asked about Holt Ridge, they'd hear stories about the community of women who'd built a timber empire in the mountains. About the couple who'd started it all with nothing but a practical arrangement and the determination to survive. About the place where women ran from their pasts and found their futures. Some of the stories were exaggerated, others understated the reality, but they all contained the same essential truth: that Holt Ridge wasn't just a place on a map. It was proof that broken people could build something beautiful, that running away could become running toward, that the hardest choices often led to the most extraordinary lives. Evelyn and Caleb never left the ridge. They grew old there, watching the community expand and evolve, helping countless women find the same freedom they'd found. And when the time came for them to pass on the operation to the next generation, they did so knowing they'd built something that would outlast them. Not a perfect legacy. Not a story without scars or struggles or moments of doubt, but a real one, built by real people who'd chosen each other and this mountain and this hard, beautiful life. And in the end, that was more than enough. The last thing Evelyn did before she died, decades later with Caleb's hand in hers and the community they'd built gathered around, was whisper the same words she'd spoken on their wedding day. Every day I choose you. I choose this ridge. I choose the life we built. Not because I have to, because I want to. And she